Hey, what's up? It's Matt, and today I want to talk to you about a book that changed my life, Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. Dan is a psychology professor at Duke University, and this book is just truly amazing. It's all about how we behave in ways that don't make sense, ways that are irrational, and that we do it consistently, predictably, without even realizing it. The experiments Dan and his peers did in this book absolutely fascinated me, and I want to just go over some of my favorites with you in the hopes that you'll love it just as much as I did. Chapter 1. The Truth About Relativity. This is a real advertisement Dan saw for The Economist magazine. He wondered why the middle option, the print-only subscription, even existed if there's a clearly better one, print and electronic, for the exact same price. So why would anyone ever buy just the print? Would anyone buy just the print? He did a small experiment with his students acting as potential buyers and found just that. The last option was heavily preferred with 84, and no one wanted the middle option. Now, because no one bought the middle option, it shouldn't make any difference if we take it out. So Dan did that and ran another experiment with just the electric and then electric and print subscriptions. However, take a look at the results when he asked which his students would buy with just those two options. Before, just 16% of students wanted the electronic-only option, but now 68 do. What's going on here? The Economist print-only subscription is what Dan calls a decoy. A decoy is a similar but slightly inferior version of an option that no one would select on their own. But the purpose isn't for it to be selected. The purpose of a decoy is to make something else look better in comparison to it. For example, it may be difficult to compare the electronic-only version and the electric and print version, but when there's a print version, which is just clearly worse than the electric and print one, it makes the electric and print one look better, and more people select that. And again, this happens even though more people naturally prefer the electronic version. Dan's also done similar experiments with decoys, finding that people are more likely to believe someone's attractive if there's a decoy version of them, a slightly worse but similar version. Now, in reality, the decoy effect is just a manifestation of our sense of relativity, our tendency to understand the value of something by comparing it to its other related things. It's why store marketers can put black pearls next to diamonds and rubies and have people think they're worth a lot. It's why the circle on the left here looks bigger than the right, even though they're the same size. And it's why you could feel like you're underpaid if a peer makes more money than you, even if you're already very wealthy to begin with. If we can remember that really everything is relative, hopefully we can look at products and our lives through a less biased lens, and ultimately be happier. Chapter 11. The Context of Our Character, Part 1. Dan's now curious about how we can choose to act honestly, or dishonestly. So he creates an experiment, which is basically a test. You take it, and the more correct questions you get, the more money you can earn. But some of the groups are given the opportunity to cheat. They have to transfer their answers to a different sheet, which actually had the answers pre-marked on it. Did they cheat? The unfortunate answer is yes, they did. Though what's interesting is that no one cheated entirely. No one took every single answer they had incorrect and gave themselves 100%. Most people cheated by just a little bit, inflating their scores by a couple of points. Another interesting thing to note in this experiment is that different groups had different chances of being caught, and that actually didn't affect it at all. Once people could cheat, they all did by relatively a similar amount. It's a little strange that we definitely have this capacity for dishonesty, and yet we like to view ourselves as honest people. It seems that in order to maintain this illusion of honesty and purity, integrity, we only bend the rules in ways that don't feel like cheating. We wouldn't fudge all of the answers, just a couple, because it's only a silly psych experiment and it's not like it's much money, and we wouldn't steal $5 from the company register, but of course I would take home 2 or 3 pens if my kids wanted them. Dan conducted a couple more experiments now to see if he could curb that dishonest behavior he had found. He did the exact same things as before, with tests where people could cheat, but beforehand he asked people to think about the 10 commandments and write as many of them down as they remembered. This might sound totally trivial, but those students didn't cheat at all. Whether they could remember all 10 commandments or just one, the act of thinking about something more was enough to deter the cheating. Dan found this exact same thing replicated when he gave a test to MIT students and had them sign the MIT honor code before beginning, even though MIT doesn't even have an honor code. Or at least they didn't back then, I don't know now. By filling their heads with especially moral thoughts right before the moment of temptation, it was especially difficult for participants to justify any amount of cheating they could have done, no matter how small. I imagine that seeing honor statements everywhere would severely dull their effect after a while, but thinking about something moral seems like a really simple way to just have people be more honest. Chapter 10. The Effect of Expectations. This next chapter is all about how expectations affect our reality, and I've already covered this, so you can go ahead and watch it whenever you want. But I'm just going to talk about the new things that Dan adds to the table here. Dan did an experiment where he offered 2 free samples of beer to people coming into a restaurant. They would try both types and then tell him which they preferred, first or second. The beers were actually the same, but the second one had drops of balsamic vinegar added to it. And if that sounds gross to you, then congrats, you're just like everyone else who, when they heard there was vinegar in the beer, they didn't like it as much as the other one. But when they didn't know there was anything different with the beer, they actually liked it more. Hearing that an ingredient that doesn't usually go with beer was in their beer created this expectation of this shouldn't taste good, and that's what they experienced. Their knowledge of that ingredient modified the taste. Dan did another experiment in this category where people tasted the beers and didn't know what was in them, but after they said that they liked the one with vinegar in it more, he told them, "There's vinegar in your beer, by the way." When they were told after that it had balsamic vinegar in it, they still liked it the same. That expectation wasn't able to taint their experience because they experienced it without any biases, without expecting there to be any weird ingredients in it. Expectations can do so much, ranging from how we experience events to the way our brain reacts, and again, I'll refer people to the video I made earlier, and of course, the book. Chapter 15, Beer and Free Lunches. In yet another beer-related experiment, Dan goes to a restaurant and offers tables 4 samples of different beers, and they just order normally the way you would when you're in a restaurant. They get the beer, they write down how much they enjoyed it. That's the control group. He does this again and has the customers write their orders privately this time, so that they don't know what everyone at their table ordered. Then, they get the beer, drink it, rate their happiness, the whole thing. So what happened? Well, when people ordered together, publicly, the way we normally do, the orders were much more different. If someone had, say, wanted type A beer and someone before them ordered that, they switched to something like type B or C. Instead of thinking, this is still the beer I want and it doesn't matter if someone else ordered it, they thought, I can't order this now if someone else has ordered it. How am I supposed to be an individual? People were willing to sacrifice their own pleasure in order to project an image of themselves onto everyone else. Now, as you can imagine, this didn't happen when people ordered privately. There was no social influence or pressure to appear different. Everyone just got what they ordered. And ultimately, the people who were found to be most happy with their drinks and experience were the people who ordered privately, and the people who ordered first in the public condition. And what's crazy too is that the culture you live in has a very big impact on the social pressures you experience. Dan took this experiment to Hong Kong and found the same results, that ordering publicly changed what you would have wanted had you ordered privately. But instead of the results being more different, when people ordered publicly in Hong Kong, more people ordered the same drink. The effects of social influence obviously apply to more than just ordering beers in a restaurant, but maybe selecting something you know you want and sticking to it no matter what could make us happier. Finally, Chapter 4, The Cost of Social Norms. This chapter and this experiment I'm about to describe are actually my favorites in the entire book. Dan and his team go out into the streets and they're asking people, hey, would you help us move this couch? To some people, they offer an amount that is normal, reasonable for helping a stranger to move a couch. For others, they offer a monetary amount that is lower, definitely lower than that. And for others, they don't offer anything. They just say, would you mind helping us move this couch? What do you think happened? Well, people who were offered a reasonable amount of money did, I guess, the reasonable thing in helping move it a reasonable amount of times. People who were offered less than that also did, I guess, what makes sense. They were offered less money, and so more of that group declined to help. But what's interesting is that the group that wasn't offered anything, the group to which Dan approached and said, would you mind helping us move this couch? Those people helped more than the group that was offered a little bit of money. In fact, that group helped just as frequently as the group that was paid a reasonable amount to move the couch. And if you think about it, that's crazy. People who were offered money were doing this at a lower rate than people who were offered nothing. Why? Basically, when they were offered money, they were thinking in what Dan calls market norms. Is this money worth my time and effort? And they made a decision based off of that. Moving a couch makes sense at a reasonable amount because then it's just a small job. But a paltry amount for the same task? That's, insulting. But when you're not in those two groups, when you're not working for money, you're dealing with what Dan calls social norms. These are just favors, helping people out for the sake of helping others, which in turn makes you feel good. You'd, hopefully, help me move a couch because it's the nice thing to do, but the second I add, hey, I'll give you $3 for it, you'd say, you really don't need to offer me anything, or maybe even, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm sure we've all been in situations like that, where we were offered money for doing something that we totally did not want or need money for, and it's awkward. Keep it in the social norms, people! Here's another fun example. A while back, the AARP wanted to offer reduced legal services to its needy retirees, and contacted lawyers for doing this at maybe $30 an hour. The lawyers looked at this in market norms and said, this is so much cheaper than what we usually charge, sorry, we're not helping out. But then, the head of the AARP did the exact same thing, but said, could you help us out for free? And the lawyers overwhelmingly said, yes, we can do that. Like, what? That's crazy! When money, market norms, was attached to it, they thought it was just too cheap for their time, but when it became a social norm thing, you're doing this for free, they were able to think of themselves as good people and just doing it for the sake of helping others, and they overwhelmingly said yes. Another experiment of Dan's found that gifts, chocolates, fell in the social norms category of reward. People who had given gifts with different prices still worked the same. They still put forth the same effort. But as soon as price tags were put next to the gifts, it transitioned them into market norms, and the group that got the cheaper gift worked less efficiently. Also, yeah, different shirt. I ran out of time yesterday and had to finish filming it a different day. I think it's interesting that every time participants were paid to do something, it immediately registered as market norms. They didn't interpret it as, oh, I'm doing this favor and getting money for it. It understandably was interpreted as a job. This section has gone for quite a while, so I want to leave you with a story. There was a daycare center in Israel that wanted parents to stop picking up their kids late, so they imposed a fine on it. You can guess what happened here. Parents started picking up their kids later. Before this, all the transactions were sort of in the realm of social norms. If they left their kid later than they should have, they weren't being considerate of the workers in the daycare center. But now that they had imposed a fine, it became more market norms, and they no longer had to worry about the time of the daycare center as long as they paid the fine. Realizing they'd done messed up, the daycare center removed the fine, but parents still picked them up at the time rate responsibility level that they had when the fine was imposed. The social norm was totally overpowered by the market norm even after the market norm was taken away. Basically, there's a very delicate relationship between social and market norms, and the more we explore and understand it, the better off we'll probably be. Honestly, I could go on for so much more about social norms and all the stuff that I didn't talk about in this book and the stuff in his other books, but this video went on much longer than I expected, so I kinda gotta stop it here. But the bottom line that Dan is trying to make here with all of his experiments and this book is that a lot of people assume humans are totally rational decision-making creatures, but in fact, we're irrational a lot of the time, and not just randomly irrational, predictably irrational. Another thing I appreciate about this book is that it's not just talking about cool experiments, but it also talks about how to incorporate them into the public life, whether through policy or just ways you can change your own behavior. Just trying to make the world a better place, which is awesome. One more thing. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned that this book changed my life, but I didn't explain how. Before I read this book, I didn't really know what psychology was, what it was about, ways that people behaved, and reading this book was just so utterly fascinating. It showed me all the cool things that people can actually do, things that don't make sense, and it's what inspired me to study psychology in college. And frankly, I think it's one of the biggest catalysts that encouraged me to have a scientific mind, and I wouldn't be the person I am today if it weren't for this book. I wouldn't be studying the same things, I wouldn't be doing YouTube, I don't know if I'd be here if it weren't for this book. So this video is obviously a conjecture video, but it's as much that as it is a sincere thank you to Dan Ariely, who's just truly inspired me and probably so many other people to just love psychology and science and this awesome, inquisitive, curious mindset that I think is just so beneficial. So yeah, thank you, Dan, for everything you did. I wish I could tell this to your face, but I guess you're just oh wait, that's right! So I actually contacted Dan a while ago and said, do you want to do a live hangout? And he said, sure. So guess what? Monday, the 28th at noon Eastern time, that's gonna happen. I'm putting all the links to that in the description. You should go check out his site, leave comments saying things like ideas on the stuff I've said, questions you might want to ask him. And we're gonna get to have an awesome conversation with this really fascinating guy who's just done so many awesome things. Dan, I'll see you on weekday.